in, or welcome back. We've got a little bit different of a setup today, a little bit different of a stream. My name is Andrea if you are new here, and if you are not new, welcome back. So excited to have you in today for a dice pouring stream. I know the setup is not the most ideal. We're going to make the best of it. Eventually, I would love to get an overhead rig for the camera, but we don't have that right now, so we're going to make do with this different angle than we normally do. It's fine. I'm really excited to get to pour some dice with you today. So the plan for today is to start by prepping molds, prepping the materials, and kind of walking through what that process looks like. A couple of things before we jump in. This is not my normal streaming time or my normal stream. You can normally find me on this channel on Tuesday nights and Sunday afternoons doing a Kingdom Hearts playthrough, which is a ton of fun on Tuesday nights, and then on Sunday afternoons we do a bunch of different games. Most recently, we are checking out 2 Point Campus, which has been a lot of fun, and we're going to be doing that this Sunday. And you can find out more information about my streams. If I could spell Twitter correctly, that would be helpful. But you can find some more information about those streams over on twitter.com/ShattedLadySif. I post when I'm going live, what I'm going to be doing, things like that. I might do some polls about what I should check out on Sundays in the future, so it's a really great way to stay up to date, especially when I do these one-off streams like today. And then, since this is a resin pouring stream, I make dice. And I make so many dice that I cannot feasibly keep them all, so I also sell them. And do giveaways and all sorts of really fun things like that. So if you're interested in having the chance to win some dice, or just want to know like what's coming to the shop, I definitely recommend checking out my Instagram and my shop page. Both of those are linked below. Right now I've got a coupon code available in my shop. If you use code August10, the numbers 1 and 0, not spell out 10, you can get 10% off anything that's currently available in the shop through tomorrow, Friday night, so the 19th at midnight. And then I have new items coming to the shop Saturday at 11 a.m., which I'm really excited about. So today we're making a lot of dice, but we're also only making 2 designs because I want a lot of galaxies. So before we even get into the resin and we get gloved up, I need to prep my supplies. So for the galaxy dice, the thing that really creates that impact is Mylar Cellophane. People call it different things, but it's this nice crinkly stuff that has a bunch of really cool reflective color in it. So we have a few different kinds. Most of these are from OOAK Artist Emporium. Focus, maybe. It's really shiny. It's going to have a hard time. But these are their Angelina films. And I have them in a few different colors. I don't know what this one is called because I lost the outer packaging, but we're going to be using Opal Sparkle, Aurora Borealis, whatever this purple one is, and then I have a little bit of this left that I'm going to throw in there as well. So what I'm going to do is actually, we're just going to cut some of this up. I like to prep everything before we get the resin out, because once you get the resin out, you are on a time limit. Because it will start curing, and once it starts curing, you're basically just out of time. So we want to prep our molds, prep all of our materials, so that once that resin is mixed, we have as little steps to do as possible. So we're going to be prepping for 2 designs today. We are going to be prepping this galaxy, and then we are also going to be prepping some snake skin. To do a snake skin pour. So what I'm doing right now, because we're pouring so many dice of this design, including a big chonky boy, I'm cutting double what I would normally get for this, and we're just going to kind of layer it so we can cut it up into a cup. So the opal has like this really cool like reds and greens in it. So we're gonna cut some slices of this, And then we're going to cut some pieces. I'm going to cut some smaller pieces, and then I want to make sure I cut a couple of bigger pieces because we are going to also be pouring a 30 millimeter D20, which is much larger than a standard D20. Let's see. I have a couple here that need sanded still. So this is like the standard D20. This is the chonky boy. So we want to have some bigger pieces for our larger mold, just so it looks a little bit better. So I'm just going to stack all of these together, and I'm just going to start kind of cutting, kind of hacking away at it. And it does not matter like what the shape of the cut is. It actually is better if there's some variation in what your shapes are. Some people like to cut just squares. I kind of just go at it and get whatever shapes I get. I do a lot of like triangles or like blocky, like not quite trapezoids, but just kind of different geometric shapes. And I try and get a variety of like sizes and widths. Basically, we're going to be crinkling these up and sticking them into our dice. But you want it to be like small enough that it'll fit in the die, while also not being a problem. It's a fine balance. It is a fine balance, that is for sure. But I'm just cutting it into this cup here, and we're gonna crinkle it and place it in our molds once we get some clear in there. But this part takes a little while, so this is what we're starting with. So while we're doing this, hopefully y'all are having a good day. Again, this is not my normal stream time. It's kind of weird to be live at 10:30 on a Thursday when there's school, but you know, being recently unemployed, we're making the best with the time that we have. So I'm gonna cut some bigger pieces before I forget and put those in a separate cup here. So these ones will be for the chunky D20, just because I didn't want to forget to do that. So a little bit about me and this process. I started making dice in May of 2020, so a little more than 2 years ago now, because I saw some dice on a Facebook group that I really wanted, but they were auctioned off for like $300, and I was like, I could make those. Spoiler alert, making dice is not cheap, and it would have been cheaper for me to just buy that one set of dice and move on. I didn't do that. I was like, you know, I'm going to learn how to make dice. And it's been great. It's been very fun. But it was also very expensive to get into and a very big learning curve. Resin is not easy to work with. And with something like this where you really don't want air in it, it's really hard to minimize bubbles. So it was a journey, but it has been a really wonderful journey. And the set of dice that sparked this interest was a set of blue galaxy dice. I didn't start making galaxy dice until over 1.5 years into my dice making journey because I just couldn't figure it out. I tried a couple of times and they just didn't turn out right, and it was really frustrating. So it was kind of just, it was one of those like white whale designs. I think every maker has them, that like one design that you really wish you could make, but you just can't for whatever reason. And for me, that was galaxies. Luckily, the dice making community is phenomenal and is always willing to like talk about processes and techniques. And I've learned a lot from some other wonderful makers in the community, and I finally made some galaxy dice that I was really, really happy with. And that is what we're making today. So I'm really excited to kind of walk through my process and give back a little to the community. That really inspired me. This is probably way too much, but I make this design fairly often, so having this all cut up ahead of time is not that big a deal. If you don't like looking at reptiles or snakeskin, I suggest not watching the next part of the stream, because we're also going to be prepping some snake shed. This is from a friend of mine who's snake shed, and she was so kind enough to send that to me. So it was not, I guess, I don't know how you would unethically harvest snake skin, but I guess if you like breed snakes specifically to like steal their skin or something, I don't know. But it is from a friend of mine who has a pet snake, and the snake shed, and I asked to have it. So we're going to start with this little piece here. And so it's very thin, and it will go a little transparent. So what I want to do, this is like the underbelly, I think. I don't know a lot about snakes, but we don't want to use this part because it's just kind of too big for what I'm wanting. I want the smaller scales. So I'm going to save this. This could look really cool as like bubbles or something, perhaps, and like more of like a watery design. So I'm going to hold on to this, but we're not going to be using the bigger part today. We're going to be just using the smaller little bits, and I want to hit it with a bit of color so it doesn't go completely translucent. When you're working with snakeskin, you can do a bunch of different things with it. You can dye it with alcohol inks, which I thought about doing, but if I wanted to pour with it, I would have realistically needed to do that a couple days ago, so it had time to dry. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to hit it with some mica powder, because that's going to give it a little bit of color and a little bit of shimmer. So these are the Pearl-X powders. This one's in gold, and this one is in russet. So I'm not going to be like super picky about which colors go where, if there's overlap. I just kind of want to brush this on so that it retains a little bit of distinction when we put it in the resin and we cut it up. This is also not a brush that I would paint with. This is my like shove stuff in dice molds brush. You can see it is looking a little crazy. It's got a lot of bristles here. I use this to like put foil in my molds and stuff. So this is this brush has not been treated the most kindly, but that's okay. So I'm just kind of brushing this on the surface. It will stick a little bit. Some of it will fall off, and that's fine in both cases. Really, I just want to give the snakeskin a little bit of color so that it stands out when it's in that resin a little bit better. And then we're also going to cut this up just like we did the cellophane so that we can mix that or have that ready to go in our resin as well. I'm almost out of paper cups, so I'm switching some things that I'm storing in paper cups over to the plastic, because the plastic cups are harder to pour from because you can't bend them as easily. So I'm just going to switch a couple things over really quick while I have them. So I'm going to cut the snakeskin up as well. Again, you want kind of smaller pieces. You want to think about, you know, the size and shape of the dice you're going to be putting it in. And I'm doing 3 sets, so I need 21 pieces of snakeskin. And then if I have enough here, I'm also going to do a bigger piece for another chunky D20. So I'm just taking scissors again. I'm not super picky about the shape. They don't need to be uniform. I think they kind of look better when they're not. So some of them are more round, some of them are more sharp, maybe is a word. I try and do some like skinnier pieces. It's really, you want that, like, if you want it to feel more organic, you want a variety of shapes in your cut here. So this set is going to be based off of one of my favorite YA books, The Serpent King. It's by Jeff Zentner. It's a beautiful book. It made me cry. So this set is going to be like green and copper, and I wanted the snake skin in there just to kind of reference back to the title of the book. I don't think the cover has a snake on it, but I wanted to put this snake skin in. I made this dice set last summer, and I haven't made it since then. So I wanted to revisit the design and kind of enhance it a little bit. since I've learned a lot of new skills since the summer of 2021. I have like a whole nother, year of experience under my belt. And I think it's kind of fun to revisit designs that you haven't made in a while. So that's what we're doing with the set today. And then if we have like a boatload of extra resin, we'll just do what I like to call a chaos pour, where you don't have a plan and you just grab things and throw it in the resin and hope it works. So we'll kind of see what we end up with at the end there. Alright, so we've got our cup of snakeskin, we've got our cup of Mylar. It's time to get prepped and get started, which I am so excited about. So I'm going to just kind of put the things away that we're not going to need anymore. The scissors, the paintbrush. Can get that out of the way so we have a little more space to work with, because it's time to start mixing resin, getting our first molds ready. And we're going to start with those galaxy dice. And I mentioned at the start, we're making a lot of this design because it's very popular. And I am currently in the process of prepping for a couple of conventions. So I like to have some of my more popular designs readily available for those. So these are the molds. So these are made with my master dice that are 3D printed, sanded, polished, and then molded in silicone. You can see in this one, faintly, there is my logo down there in the D6. This has the shard D4 in it. I really like the shard D4 for galaxies because I think all those angles are really helpful. So we have a couple of those. I also have my pip mold. I have custom D6 sets and then D4 sets that are a little bit different, a little more special. This is what I call my jewelry mold because it's got the D10s and the D4 pair that make really great jewelry. And then I usually have the extra D6 and D20 and then a spare D8. Since those are the three most popular singles that I tend to sell. So this is just a spare, so that way if a D20 in my regular sets gets messed up, I have a replacement for it. Otherwise, I have some singles that I know typically sell pretty well. So those are these molds. And then we also have our nice chonky boy here. So this is that 30mm D20. This mold is looking a little worse for wear. It's a little hard to get these ones out, but these like rougher edges here do stand out. So we're just going to work with it. Since we are working with resin, it is my responsibility as a resin artist to mention resin safety, because resin is really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. It's really not good for your health. Just point blank, it's not good for your health. And people on TikTok will be like pouring dice without gloves or pouring resin without gloves or talking about safety. You shouldn't do that. At the bare minimum, like, you're an adult, theoretically. If you're not an adult, like, still make good choices. So, like, you have the right to not take safety precautions, but it's also your responsibility to educate people about how to work with these things safely, because resin's toxic. So if you're working with resin, you need to be in a well-ventilated area. I have a window in here that has very good airflow. I am tearing dice or gloves today. You need to have a respirator whenever possible, especially if you're not in a well-ventilated area. That's really important. And then you also really need gloves because you can have allergic reactions to resin. And once you have that reaction, like, it's not going to go away the next time you work with resin. Like, once you start having those reactions, you're going to pretty much always have them. So you want to wear gloves. So again, if you are working with resin, like, you have the right to make the choice to do those things or not. But I do want to name it's toxic, and you should be careful because your health is important. So I'm going to start by mixing up a ton of resin for the galaxy dice. I'm having a really hard time with gloves today, y'all. I ripped like 3 of them trying to put them on. Pro tip, get the right size gloves, because sometimes you're going to order 1,000 gloves in the wrong size and not be able to return them. So if you get it on you on accident, that is a great question. I have a spray bottle here of isopropyl alcohol. So I would start by putting some of that on a paper towel and wipe your skin off. Yeah, I have small gloves that are like just the tiniest bit too small. But if you get resin on you on accident, I've done that before. Like, I've knocked a cup over, it spills on my leg, like, things happen. I would start with isopropyl alcohol to get it off of your skin, because that's going to help neutralize some of the chemicals in there. That'll also really help if you spill it on, like, your work surface or your desk or whatever. And then I would just, like, wash your hands a couple of times in that soapy water to just really make sure you get all of those irritants off of your skin. If you get it on your skin every once in a while, it's gonna happen. So I think it's just important to, like, make sure you can clean it off as best you can. If you don't have isopropyl alcohol, I think soap and water works just as well. You might just need to wash yourself a couple of times because it's really sticky, and I find sometimes that soap doesn't get it off. Okay, it's time to start mixing resin, y'all. This is like the least exciting part because it's just clear. I'm using Chromatic Cast from Chromatic Castle. This is a 2-part 1-to-1 resin. So with your resins, it's going to come in a part A and a part B. I just knocked my entire cup of Mylar over. Oh no! Come on. This stuff is very hard to pick up. We're making a mess today, y'all. Sometimes dice making is messy. If you are not a mess person, I would not recommend making dice because it's just going to be a mess. Unfortunately, this stuff is really hard to pick up, so I'm trying to like tweezer it off of my desk so I can get it back in the cup. Okay, we're gonna put y'all over here. Out of the way. Beautiful. Excellent. Okay, I panic and run to the sink and scrub. Yeah, I think if all you have is like a sink with soap and water, I think that's fine. I've had that before when I run out of IPA. But this stuff works really well as a start because it's going to get the sticky part off of you a lot easier than I find the soap does. And then you don't want to leave just the alcohol on your skin, which is why I always follow it up with the soap and water. So it's a little bit of both. Okay, so this is a 1-to-1 resin, meaning you want equal parts, part A and part B, or the resin and the hardener. And because I'm making a crap ton of dice, we're making a crap ton of resin. And we're probably still going to need to mix more. And then with this, you want to mix so well. So we're going to just sit here and stir for a bit, have a nice little chat. So because I make my dice with a pressure pot, I'm not as careful about mixing and introducing air bubbles because I'm going to compress them all out at the end. If you don't use a pressure pot, you would want to be more careful during this step and not whip it like I am currently doing, because I'm introducing a lot of bubbles. Like you can definitely see in there already, it's starting to bubble up. I'm just not as concerned about that because I do have a pressure pot. And so I'm not being as careful as I was when I started out as far as like mixing at a rapid pace. I'm also mixing a lot of resin, so I want to go a little bit faster to really try and get in there. Scraping those sides, scraping those edges. And we're going to do this for at least 2 to 3 minutes. Because if your resin is not mixed properly, it's not going to harden. And that is the biggest tragedy in all of dice making. When you make beautiful dice and then they don't cure properly. I have some dice sitting on a heating pad right now that I'm trying to like coax to cure all the way because they're a little bit soft still, and it was one of my blanks and I spent like 5 hours on them. I'm really upset. So we're trying to get those to cure, but the best thing you can do at the start is to make sure you mix your resin all the way. It's a good arm workout. Yeah. Usagi, how long have you been making dice? I'm assuming you've made dice since you talked about running to the sink. I feel like I've seen your username before on Instagram, so if you don't make dice, apologies. Since December, oh nice. That's really exciting. I feel like that 1 year mark was a really big deal for me, and I spent that first year, I basically, after like a year, I went back and remade some of my first sets, and it was really cool to see the progress that I've made over the course of that first year, because you learn so much. So that's really exciting. All right, this is good and properly mixed, but I'm going to mix a little bit more in there. So this stuff, okay, this is the Slice of the Moon mica powder. I bought this in May of 2020. I use it in every single dice set I've ever made, pretty much, unless there's like no glitter in it at all. And I still have like almost half of it. I swear by this stuff. I'm obsessed with it. If you are looking for something that gives a little bit of shimmer in your dice without being overpowering, I highly, highly recommend this. I think this was like maybe $10, and I've had it for over 2 years. I've made like over 300 sets of dice with it. I'm obsessed with this stuff. This is my secret. It's not really a secret because I talk about it every time I stream. But I'm obsessed with this Slice of the Moon mica powder. I'm putting this straight into the clear resin because they're galaxy dice and I want everything to be sparkly. We're going to be adding a lot more glitter later, but this is just to start. So I'm going to mix that into this whole base resin because I want all of it to have that in it. So it looks a little less clear now. That's because there's a bunch of bubbles in there. Those get compressed out at the end. Yes, I highly, highly recommend. I like am still shocked that this has lasted me 2 years. Like, I make so many dice and it's still not run out. It's so impressive because you really don't need much. A little goes a really, really long way. So at this point, we're going to start by adding a clear base layer of resin to all of our molds. Yes, it's so nice when stuff lasts, especially when it's not that expensive. Like I said, I think this whole container cost me like $10, and there's still so much of it. It's really nice. I could pour straight out of this cup, but it's really full and it's really big, and we're not going to do that because that's going to end in disaster. So I'm going to transfer some of this into a clear cup, and we're going to start by basically just covering the base of each die with clear resin. I find with galaxy dice that if you have a clear base layer, all of the color shift and the glitter and everything else just shines so much better when you do. So we're going to just literally, like the barest amount, I basically just want to cover the bottom of each of my dice molds. And I'm pouring nice and tall, like nice and tall. I'm pouring pretty high up from the mold itself and trying to keep the resin stream pretty thin. That's going to help some of the air escape before it even gets into the mold. And we're not putting a lot of this clear in. We want a lot of room for some color, some contrast. This is just so that you can kind of make a window into the dice itself. I find that to be pretty helpful. This is the boring part. We're going to get to the color soon, which is my favorite part. So we've got our nice thin streams going in. So this is step 1 of the pour. This is like a multi-layered color mixing bonanza of fun. But we got to get the clear in. And then we're going to put our cellophane in. So we cut all this stuff up at the beginning. I'm not going to be super particular about matching shapes, matching colors. I'm just going to grab a couple pieces and I'm going to crinkle it up. Again, it doesn't have to be like a tiny ball. It doesn't have to be a certain shape. I just want to crinkle it because those folds are what's going to cause the different colors to show up. And we're going to shove that into our mold. I want at least 2 pieces in each die mold because the different pieces have those different colors. So you'll get a lot more variation by grabbing a couple of different ones. We're going to try and move kind of fast because our resin has a 40-minute working time, meaning after about 40 minutes it does start to thicken up, and it's a lot harder to release air once you do. Because I have that base layer of clear in here, I'm not coating these in the resin before I stick them in. You can coat them in resin. I just haven't found that to be the most beneficial with the way I pour, to do that first, so I just don't do that. But I know a lot of makers, when they work with this Angelina film, they'll coat it in resin before sticking it in their molds. And that's just to help prevent air from being captured. But because we do this in several layers, I have other ways to prevent that from happening. Let's move some of this out of the way so we can kind of see a little bit here. So we're just grabbing and crinkling, shoving it into the mold. So at that point, you're going to have something that looks like this. You can kind of see some of those different colors flashing already. For something like the D20, if I'm looking and it looks a little empty, I might try and find a smaller piece and add a third piece in. If a die looks really full, you might need to take a piece out. So it's definitely, you know, you got to play with it a little bit as you're working, but there's not a wrong way to make dice. And so as long as you're like doing something that makes you happy, the end result's going to look great. Yeah, I like to try and grab, I want to make sure I have at least 2 different colors going into each die, and I try and also grab some different shapes. Since we kind of cut up those big stacks, we have a bunch of different pieces to work with. This is another one of those really tedious parts of the process that aren't the most fun, but definitely worth it with those end results. If a mold is looking too full, you can always take stuff out as well, because we do need room to add more resin into each of these. And if the cellophane is too thick, it will kind of press against the edges of your mold. It can create some weird warping, things that we don't want. I know space dice are kind of the thing right now with the James Webb Telescope. People have been making some beautiful dice based off of those photos, which is really cool to see. It's always really neat to see like where people get inspiration for their dice from. And so many people have made dice. I think it's the Cosmic Cliffs, that like blue and orange like swirly part. Like, I've seen so many dice made based off of those photos, but they're also unique, which is really cool to see like how different people will take inspiration from the same thing, but like everyone's interpretations are going to be kind of different, which is one of the things I really, really love about the community. I've never seen someone be like, oh, I made those first, you can't make those. So it's cool to see everyone's interpretations of those things. I have not made James Webb dice specifically, mostly because I'm like, I don't think I could do it any better than the stuff that's already been made. And also just because, I don't know, I don't like being trendy, I think. I think maybe that's it. Like, it took me a really long time to jump on some of the other dice trends, like blanks. Blanks are, they're basically slightly smaller version of your dice that don't have numbers on them. So you would cast your blanks first, and then you can paint them, or a lot of people use like nail decals or like carve into them, and then you recast them in your numbered molds. And it took me so long to get on the blank hype train. I was like, nope, I don't want those. I don't want to be casting all of my dice twice. That sounds like so much work. I don't see the point. Now I'm obsessed with them. Only for certain things. Like, I really like making geodes and like carving up the blanks and putting like natural stones in them. And I've been working with some black sand for my trip to Iceland that I didn't want to like texture the bottom of the dice. But it took me forever to get blanks. It took me forever to get alternate D4s, and now I never want to see another Caltrop D4 again. Like, I don't like the Caltrops. They're a pain to work with. But it took me so long to get on that train because I was like, no, the original shapes are the only shapes. So maybe in like 6 months I'll make James Webb dice. Who knows? Never say never, I suppose. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have some extra cellophane cut up already, which is kind of nice because I do make this design fairly often. So having that extra cut up already is not the end of the world. Ew, this is kind of a really big piece. Alright, we are almost done with this really tedious bit, which is not the most exciting thing to watch. But it is necessary. We gotta get the stuff in the mold. Gonna put a couple more pieces in our chonky boy here. Alright. So I'll show a couple more of these. So like you can kind of see in here, we've got lots of color going on, which is exactly what we want. And now it is time to start adding color to our dice molds. So with Galaxy dice, you kind of want to layer your colors and to layer the glitter a little bit. I like to do a lighter version of the color and then a darker version of the color, and then we end with a black to really help everything pop. We're also going to use like 8 different glitters. So all of these are from Chromatic Castle. They're a UK brand that's working really hard to create cosmetic safe glitters. So I have like 8 of them here, and I just kind of put a little bit of each one into this cup right here. And then we'll also be putting some blue in here because we are making Astrophel, which is a blue galaxy design. I've made a few different galaxies in the last several months. We've got Astrophel, we have the Northern Lights and Aurora Borealis. Those ones are both blanks that have that volcanic sand in them. Then I've made like a purple one. I made a red one once that I was really impressed with. I wasn't expecting to like the red one as much as I did. So I just want a ton of color shift in here. I think galaxies, part of what makes them so cool is they have so much going on, which is why I'm not really measuring anything. I'm just dumping all of it in here. I am missing one of the ones I normally use. Let me see. No. Here it is. Alright, so now you can see this resin has like a pool of color shift in it, which is great. And we are going to add a drop of Glacier Blue alcohol ink. This is from the Ranger line. So alcohol inks are translucent, and you can make them more color, like more vibrant and less translucent by adding more color. We want to start with a really light amount because we're actually going to darken this in the next step. So this is a really nice, just like light blue color, And we're going to pour a little bit of this. Again, we're pouring nice and high, nice and slow. We're going to pour a little bit of this into each mold. We want to leave plenty of room because we're going to add 2 more layers of color to this. So right now you're kind of trying to get your molds about half full. And I'm kind of swiggling it around a little bit. I want to try and cover that Mylar, give the resin some time to work down into the folds of that Mylar. We'll let it rest. The resin will settle a little bit as we go. But we're shooting for about half full here. The nice thing about this is that even if the colors aren't exactly the same every time, they're still going to look beautiful, which is really nice because resin and the colorings are so finicky, it's so hard to get them exactly the same every time. And so you got to be a little flexible. Smart people will write down their resin alcohol recipes. I should do that, and I say I'm going to, and then I never do. Which is, you know, maybe my bad, but the nice thing about doing these Twitch streams is that I also kind of have a record of how I make some of my favorite designs. So, you know, it all works out. It's fine. I've definitely made, like, dice on stream that I wasn't planning on making because I had extra resin and then became obsessed with them and had to, like, go back and watch the stream to figure out how I made them so that I could remake them. So it's kind of cool having this, like, process documented as well. Alright, so we're filling these ones up. If you accidentally put too much resin in a mold, because we do need room for it, so this one here, I filled the D20 up, like, just all the way on accident, so I'm just going to suction some of that out with a pipette so that we have room for those other 2 layers. We're also going to use this pipette later to add one of our colors in, so it's totally fine to use this pipette to siphon things out because we're not going to be wasting it just doing that. We're going to be using it for the design as well. But sometimes you just accidentally pour too much resin into your mold and you got to take some out, and that's okay. So for the chunky D20 here, I'm going to pour some in and then I'm going to burp it, which means I'm just going to kind of squeeze the edges of the mold a little bit. I'm trying to basically create space for the resin to move down and release any bubbles that are trapped in there. Because that's a bigger mold, it's a lot harder to tell if air is trapped in it. And then sometimes you pull a die that's only half full, which is disappointing. We don't want that. Okay, so I'm now going to pour some more in here. We're going to darken this color, and then I'm also going to pour some of this into another cup, and we're going to make a black. I find having a really dark back color or bottom color on Galaxy dice really helps them pop. So for this, I want to darken it up a little bit, so we're going to add some of this Monsoon color, also from Ranger Inks. I'm going to add about like 3 drops of that. And then the last thing we're going to add in here is 1 drop of Cobalt, which is a much more vibrant blue. Apparently we're doing 2 drops today because I'm feeling feisty. And then I'm going to drop it and spill some alcohol ink everywhere. It's fine. So we're going to give this a good mix. We'll test it. We'll see what the color looks like. I'm seeing this is kind of more on the green side. I want to make it a little bit more blue, so I'm going to put another drop of that Cobalt in there. You want to be careful because if you add too much alcohol, your resin might not cure. This should be fine though, since it's such a large container. So that's looking really good. I'm going to start suctioning some of that up into my pipette And then I'm going to make my black. To do that, I have, what is this? This is from Chameleon Pigments. It's Rainbow Nori from Glitter and Crafts for You. I think I got this on Etsy. But it's like a black and blue chameleon powder. So I'm going to put a nice sizable chunk of that into this resin, and then we're going to put a couple drops of black alcohol ink in there as well. The pigment powder is going to give the black a little bit of shimmer and texture. And it's also going to help the black be more opaque, because I find you need a lot of black alcohol ink to get a nice, rich, black, opaque color. So this coming out of the pipette is still not quite the right color. So we're gonna... It's like still a little on the green side, so I'm just going to kind of try and doctor that color up a smidge. Just a smidge. Like, this will work. It should work. And it will also darken a little bit as it cures, because resin will kind of, the colors react a little bit differently. It's just not quite as dark as I'm needing it to be. Let me see. Here we go. So to try and give this a little bit more dark blue, I'm going to add this sapphire blue from Let's Resin to it. Again, you don't want to add too much because you don't want your resin to pigment ratio to change too much. Yeah, that's definitely much more on the blue side. And this is why resin, you just kind of got to experiment a little bit, because sometimes you're not going to get quite the color you want right away. This is looking a lot better though. So giving this a good mix, we're going to let the pipettes soak that up. I'm going to stick a second one in here because we're just working with so much resin and I want to make sure we get everything in on time. So we're soaking up this, and what we're going to do is we're going to inject it into our dice, and then we're going to top it off with the black. So when I say by inject, I might regret putting all these colors away. It should be fine. Okay, so we take our pipette and we're gonna stick it down inside the dice molds and kind of move it around. We don't want to fully fill it because we do need to put black on here, but I'm just kind of trying to move this color around inside the dice. So I want it to be mixing around the Mylar that we put in there. And then we'll take our black and we'll just pour this on top. When you pour your dice, you want to have a slight dome of resin on top because the resin will shrink a little bit as you squeeze the air out of it in the pressure pot. So these dice, the ones that have the black on them, I know that those are done. And we don't need to put blue in there. So we're kind of just going around filling our dice molds about 3/4 of the way full with this blue, and then we'll top it off with the black. And I do this kind of same technique with most of my galaxy designs. We have a lighter version of the color, a darker, richer version of the color, and then we top it with the black. So if you've ever wondered, how do I make my galaxies? All of these follow the same basic technique. As you're filling it up, sometimes you'll notice that the Mylar is floating a little bit, or it's like outside of the dice mold, so you just kind of poke at it with the pipette or your stirring stick to make sure that all of the Mylar is inside the dice mold, so that you are less likely to get those lifted faces or breached inclusions, which can create some holes in your dice. Nobody wants holes in their dice. So while we're doing this, if y'all have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. It can be about this design or the dice making process in general. I'd love to kind of give back to the community with these pouring streams, since I've learned so much from other makers. So if you have any of those questions, feel free. If I can answer them, I will. Otherwise, we'll keep trucking along here. Looks like we're gonna need to mix up a little more of the black, which is fine. That's why we made so much resin to start with. It's kind of hard to estimate how much of each color you'll need, so when I'm doing multiple colors, I always mix more resin than I would typically make for a given set of dice, because you're always gonna need a little bit more than you think you do. And then all of my excess resin gets put into dump molds. I make earrings out of them, I make tic-tac-toe boards, I make little meeples. So all of the resin that I use does get used. I don't like wasting the resin because resin's not the best thing for the environment. And so in this process, I try and use as much as I can so that I'm creating the least amount of waste. We are almost done with this design, and then we'll move on to our snake skin, which I'm really excited about. So with this chunky D20, I'm really making sure to reach the pipette down into all three of those bottom corners. Because this is so much larger, it does have so much more in the way of inclusions in it. I want to make sure that I'm really getting all the way into that die. And then we'll top everything off with the black. Alright, so now that these are poured, the last thing I'll do for a design like this that has a lot of bubbles kind of coming to the surface is I am going to just hit everything really quickly with a lighter. You want to be really careful when doing this because you don't want to catch anything on fire because the fumes would be really bad. And then if you heat your resin up too much, it will actually fuse to your molds. You'll damage your molds. So I'm just doing really quick passes. I'm not touching the fire to the resin, but if I'm seeing large bubbles, I'm just kind of running this over those to help those larger ones pop. We made way too much black, but that's okay. I might be able to do something with this, So what I like to do with my excess resin is I'll transfer it all into the same cup. So that way we can get some really fun kind of layered pours with the extra. So I'm going to pour this all into here. And then I think I'm going to pour these into my earring molds. I try and use those earring molds for excess resin. They're really great sellers at conventions. And then I also make tic-tac-toe boards with this one. I just pulled this one out. So this is all just leftover resin that I poured in over the course of a couple of weeks or months, depending on how often I'm pouring and how much extra resin I have. And you get just some really interesting and unique patterns when you do that. My earring mold is off to the side, so I'm currently just transferring this extra resin into that. And then I think I'm also going to make some meeples because we have a little bit extra. And then we'll put the lid on these and we will move into our other pour. Just gonna try and get everything out of the way here. So when you're putting your caps on your molds, you want to make sure that you get them on properly on the correct mold and kind of locked in without squeezing too much of that extra resin out. So it's kind of a rolling motion. You take the lid, you'll line it up with those registration marks, And you kind of just evenly press down a little bit so that it's like firmly seated in, everything is locked in. We're going to go through and do that for each of these molds. And then I'm going to transfer these over to my pressure pot caddy so that once we get all of our pours done, we can move everything over all at the same time. So again, you're going to line up your registration marks. I just got a hair in there. We're going to pull that out with our tweezers. Don't want that in your dice. I've definitely gotten like stray cat hair in dice before. My pets are not allowed in here when I'm casting, but they'll come in here sometimes when I'm doing listing photos. So occasionally we just get, you know, the stray cat hair. It's fine. And then you'll do the same thing with this, so the registration marks look a little different, but you're still just going to line those in. Press down to secure it properly, and then we'll move on. Alright, so we need to mix up some more resin. I'm going to do that. We're not going to need as much. We're only making 3 dice, so I'm only going to be making, and it's only one color, so I'm going to be making like 80-ish milliliters of resin. So for those of you that weren't here earlier, we're using chromatic cast. This is a 2-part resin. It is 1-to-1 by volume. So when you're mixing, you want to make sure you know how much you need to mix and if it's by weight or by volume. Some are both. Some can only be 1. Some are 1-to-1. I've also seen 2-to-1 and 3-to-1. So you want to just make sure that you know how much resin you need for your specific resins that you're using. Making sure to read those information sheets. Alright, so just like last time, we're going to go ahead and mix this up really well. Again, we need to mix this for 2 to 3 minutes. Even though it's a smaller amount of resin, we still want to make sure we're mixing it all the way. And again, I'm not being the most careful because I am putting all of these dice in a pressure pot, so that will compress the air bubbles out. You do not need a pressure pot to make dice. I know there are some makers in our space that are very popular, they're doing very well, and they don't use a pressure pot. I find it easier, and I just didn't have the patience to do it the other way. So you definitely can do it. The pressure pot is not necessary, but it is a really nice to have that just makes things a little bit easier. I'm going to go ahead and put some of this sparkle in now because I know I'm going to use it. I'm going to get these color shift powders out of the way because we're not going to need any of those for this design. It's nice to just have a little bit less stuff out as you go. Give this a nice good mix here, and we're going to get our next set of molds out. I'm going to set this chunky guy out just in case we have enough for it. If we don't, it's totally fine. I'm not expecting to, but just in case, we'll have that one out. So these molds are very similar. The only difference is this one has the barrel or the crystal D4, so it's a little bit longer. I find this one really nice when you're working with kind of larger inclusions, when you're working with florals, just because it gives you a little bit more space to put them in. So that is what we will be using for this particular design. So just like last time, we're going to start with a cup. We're going to start with a little bit of clear. Again, I just want to have that window so we can really see the snake skin that's in there. This one is going to be a little different. We're going to do one single color after this, and we're also going to add some foil into it, just to get some different textures and colors in here. So I'm going to do our base here. Again, we're just kind of trying to cover the very bottom of our molds. That way we're not putting an inclusion directly onto the bottom of the mold, which makes it a lot harder for resin to fully cover your inclusions. Unless you're coating them in resin, which is kind of the other option there. All right, so these have all been placed. So we have our snake skin. We prepped this earlier. It's brushed with that shiny stuff. We're gonna just go ahead and tuck these in. I'm gonna kind of try and wrap these along the edges of our dice a little bit. For the longer, skinnier pieces, I try and put those on the longer, skinnier dice. Placement with this inclusion is a little bit more important than with the other one because you will see this more. So you do kind of want to think about, like, what do I want this to look like in the die itself? So I'm definitely using the bigger pieces and the bigger dice, the smaller pieces and the smaller dice. If a piece just seems too big, you can also just tear it. Like, the stuff tears really easily because it's just dry skin. So some of them, it seems like I kind of just cut them a little too big, and I'm just kind of tearing them so that they're smaller pieces. The other thing to note is that snake skin does float, so that's kind of why I'm trying to press it along an edge and really pressing it down into the bottom of the mold. And once these molds are done, I'll kind of pick a mold up and show you what these look like placed inside. I think one of the cool things about making dice is finding new things to put in them. Because really, as long as it's not a heavy inclusion, you're not really going to distort the weight of your molds. So like these are so light, this is not really going to distort or throw off the balance of your dice. A lot of people that aren't super familiar with dice have questions about balance. It's not really an issue. So I'm going to put some more of our clear resin in our cup, and then we're going to start adding our color, our inclusion. So these dice are going to be green. This is just the green Let's Resin alcohol ink. I'm not hearing anything in it. I hope there's some color in here. Okay, there is. So I'm just going to put a couple drops in here. I want it to be relatively translucent, so I don't want to put too much in. And then we're also going to take, these are foil sheets. So it is just a sheet of foil. These break up really nicely when you mix them. So I'm just going to kind of push a little bit of this into my cup. And we're going to mix this as well. And you can see it's now breaking down into nice small pieces that will kind of float throughout the resin. We'll give this a good mix. And then the last thing we're going to do is it's kind of like a dirty alcohol ink pour. I'm going to be putting a drop of this copper pinata alcohol ink in, and I'm not going to stir it because I want it to kind of swirl around. So we're just going to put a drop on each side of the cup, and that will kind of mix in as we pour. So I'm going to pour from nice and high up, swirl around a little bit so that copper gets mixed in. And we'll add a couple more copper drops after every like 2 to 3 dice so that we can keep getting a little bit of that copper in each die. And that's just going to add another layer of interest and color to the dice. And because we're not mixing it in, it'll be pretty subtle because that copper kind of settles in places and creates some really interesting like ribbons and veins, but it's not going to be like a really bright in your face bit, which will be nice for this design. And I'm just kind of swirling my wrist in small circles as we pour, and that's so that that copper doesn't go in exactly the same place as we're pouring. It's going to help mix it into the die as a whole. looks like we'll need to mix up the last of our resin here, so we probably won't have enough for the chunk, but that's okay. Actually, no, we have a little bit from the other pour. We might be able to do the chunky D20 for this one too. We'll just use the leftover from the other resin for that. When you're doing this, I don't recommend mixing resins that you've mixed from two separate instances. So like I wouldn't use the rest of this cup with the rest of the cup from the other one, just because you don't know if you have a mixing issue with either of them. And sometimes combining them can really throw off your ratios. So I don't recommend doing that. Put our green in. Give that a good mix. We won't put as much of the foil in, but I do want to grab a little piece. Tuck that in there. We're going to mix that so it breaks down. And then we'll do the same thing for our last mold. Got our copper here. And we are nearing the end here, so if there are any last questions that anyone in chat has, I know it's been a little quiet. This is definitely a perfect stream for lurking, so no worries if you're just hanging out. But if you do have any questions, I would love to answer them for you as we get near the end of our pour here. Okay, so we're cutting it close. We're cutting it close here. I might not have mixed enough, but we're gonna make it work. Almost forgot the foil. It's always real rough when you're like finishing up and you almost forget one of the inclusions for like your last die and you're like, well, that would have been really awkward. Just kind of push these down or they're gonna stick to the side of the cup. You know what, it's fine. We're gonna make it work. Copper. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna have enough for our chunky D20. I think we'll see. We'll see. It'll kind of depend on what we have left after this last die. I don't think we will. So I think I'm just going to pour this into our dump mold just so that we don't have like a half full die, because that's... Yeah, we don't have 30 milliliters. So I'm going to just pour this into my tic-tac-toe mold. It'll look great with the black and the blue that we've already got in there. A really interesting base for this next tic-tac-toe board. So I'm currently just letting some of those air bubbles come to the surface as they need to. Alrighty. And just like we did with the other design, I'm going to just briefly hit these with a lighter to pop those really large surface bubbles. Again, you don't want the fire to touch directly to your molds because you don't want your resin to fuse to the silicone, because then you permanently damaged your mold. So I'm just looking for those very large air bubbles that have kind of floated to the top. We have popped those. We'll put our lids on, and then that will be the last thing for today's stream. So basically at this point what happens is these molds will go into the pressure pot where they will be there all day for about 12 hours or so. That's about when I can demold these ones. So after about 12 hours, I'll be able to pull these and we'll get to see what we made. I usually post demolding videos to Instagram. So if you are interested in seeing what these dice look like as a not finished product, because they'll be raw, they will still need polish and everything. But if you're curious to see what these molds look like fresh out. Definitely keep an eye on the Instagram page. I'll pop that in the chat. And I'm really excited that y'all came on this journey with me today. So, waking up the keyboard. I did take my gloves off. I'm not touching my computer things with resin because that would suck. But you can check out my Instagram or my shop. Both are linked in the chat right now. I'll be posting some sneak peeks of these dice to Instagram stories later tonight probably. And then full reveals will be coming as they get finished. So if you're interested in seeing what these two designs look like, definitely give a follow over there. The other place you can give a follow is over on Twitter. That's a really great place to keep up to date. When I do these live streams in particular, I try and do like one resin pouring stream a month. I don't do them very often, but I do want to do at least one a month because they're really fun and it's a really good way to kind of share the knowledge that I've gotten from the community with others, either who are making dice, thinking about making dice, or just curious about how the handmade dice are made. I think it's a really cool process that deserves to be shown off. So you can definitely give a follow there. And then otherwise, I will be back on this channel on Sunday. We're going to keep playing 2 Point Campus. So normally I stream video games here. And we'll be playing 2 Point Campus on Sunday. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd love to see you then. Definitely give a follow so you can get notified when I go live. This has been so much fun. Thank you all so much for hanging out today, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.